Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Bride of Valentine Town. Chapter 1. Next stop, Valentine, the train master said as he walked through the car. Jessica Dunahue stared breathlessly out the window and clapped her hands together in excitement. So far, the West was exactly as she had imagined, snow-covered trees and miles of empty spaces. "Did you hear that?" she said to the three girls sharing the car with her. "Soon we'll be in Valentine Town. A town with such a name is bound to be pretty." "Aren't you a little frightened?" sweet-natured Pearl Molar asked. Jessica chuckled. "I'm too thrilled to be frightened. Besides, the mayor assured us that we won't be forced into any unions." The mayor of Valentine Town had traveled around cities in the East looking for girls willing to come west to get married. He had made the West sound so wildly and deliciously unfamiliar that Jessica had been the first one from Boston to sign up. He had told the group squeezed into the town hall about a place where everyone knew each other, and they all looked out for each other. A place with a real sense of community. He spoke about the holiday celebrations and how everyone in Valentine Town rallied to create magical days. Christmas and Valentine's Day and Easter and more had sounded memorable and touching. Jessica had imagined the town in her mind's eye, and by the time Mayor Clarence White finished speaking, she had known without a doubt that she wanted to travel to Valentine Town as a mail-order bride. "It seems so lonely out here with no big cities and so few people," brown-haired Dorothea said, her voice shaking. "That's because we're surrounded by snow," Jessica said as the train ground its wheels on the tracks. "Have we reached it?" Idella Embry asked, speaking for the first time in miles. "I don't think so," Jessica said, frowning at what suddenly seemed like an onslaught of snow. "I think there's a blizzard." The other girls left their seats and the four of them looked out the window. "Will our fiancés be waiting for us in such weather?" Pearl asked. "Of course, they will," Jessica said. The train moved at an excruciating slow speed, and Jessica found herself growing impatient at the ticking minutes. During the 5 days they had been on the train, she had thought only of Marcus Thrush. Inch by inch, the train made its way through the blizzard, and in what seemed eons later, they finally stopped in Valentine Town. Eager for a first glimpse of the man who would be her husband, Jessica was the first one out of the train and onto the platform. Immediately, a gray-haired man with a wide smile stepped forward. She beamed, happy to see the mayor again. "Welcome to Valentine Town," he said as the other girls joined her. "This is a great day for all of us." The girls laughed at his quite overdone enthusiasm. "We'll put you up in the boarding house as you get to know Valentine Town and all the fine folk that live here." "That sounds wonderful," Jessica said. "Where are the gentlemen?" She had assumed that the 4 gentlemen Mayor Clarence had picked out for them would be waiting. "I thought it might be too overwhelming for you to have all of them here." "They are waiting in the boarding house diner." Jessica swallowed a feeling of disappointment. What the mayor had arranged made perfect sense, and yet, an eager fiancé would have wanted to be present when they arrived. Shrugging away her unsettling thoughts, she followed the mayor out of the depot. "Don't worry, your luggage will follow shortly," he said as they emerged from the depot. Snow swirled gently around them as the blizzard seemed to have lost its initial force. People taking cover under store awnings gaped at them as they walked by and called greetings to the mayor. The boarding house was a 2-story building, which looked as though it had seen better days. What paint was left on the clapboards had peeled, and the windows looked smudged and scratched. "This will be your temporary home for the next few weeks," Mayor Clarence said, leading them away from the front porch to the West End stairs that led to the second floor. "I thought you ladies would like to freshen up before meeting the gentlemen. I'm sure you want to look your best." They all nodded their agreement. A middle-aged woman worked the reception table. As they entered, she stood up and smiled broadly. I can't tell you how glad I am to see you, Mayor Clarence and ladies. There was almost a riot in the diner. Mayor Clarence let out a loud laugh and proceeded with the introductions. Ladies, meet Mrs. Williams. She'll see to all your needs while you're here at the boarding house. One by one they shook her hand, and she gave them a wide, toothy smile. Come ladies, I'll show you to your rooms. I'll wait for you in the diner, Mayor Clarence said. Is 20 minutes long enough? Yes, thank you, Jessica said, answering for all of them. Her enthusiasm dipped as they walked down the dim corridor. So far, Valentine Town did not resemble her fantasies. With such a name, she'd expected everything to be cheery and clean and, well, new. Mrs. Williams opened the first door, and Jessica peered in. It contained a small bed pushed to the wall and a low chest of drawers with a tiny mirror propped on top and a bowl and pitcher. The walls could have done with a fresh coat of paint and the room looked to need a thorough washing. Jessica inhaled the musty smell in the air. Are the rooms all like this? Dorothea asked in a voice that did not hide her feelings. Yes, we keep them clean, which is no small task around here with all the dust and lack of water, Mrs. Williams replied in an offended voice. The rooms are fine, Jessica said quickly, hating to insult the boarding house owner. It was not the woman's fault that they were all accustomed to much more finery. I'll take this one. Mrs. Williams nodded appreciatively at her. Jessica entered the room, shut the door behind her, and sank onto the bed. Hard lumps pressed on her rear end. A growing sense of worry hovered at the edges of her mind. No, she wouldn't compare Valentine Town with her home in Boston. The West was as different as Mayor Clarence had warned them. And hadn't she wanted a different life from her siblings? Well, this was it. She would make the best of it. Chapter 2. I gotta tell you, Thrush, you'll be mighty surprised with your bride. Mayor Clarence leaned across the table to speak lowly to Mark. She's the prettiest of the lot. Mark smiled and feigned enthusiasm. Why hadn't he been honest with the mayor when he first heard about this mail-order bride business? He was not looking for a bride or a wife. He already had one. Well, not quite, but it wouldn't be long before Lucy Stapleton warmed to his advances. I hope mine's not an eyesore, one of the other men said, and the group erupted into laughter. They talked casually amongst themselves, but Mark could tell no one really paid attention. They all wanted a glimpse of their mail-order brides. The excitement was catching, and despite himself, he couldn't wait to see Miss Jessica Dunahue. He was not averse to a pretty face. Just then, there was a slight commotion at the entrance. The people seated at tables near the door were giving their boisterous greetings. The mayor jumped to his feet, and after a wink at the group, he hurried to the entrance. The diner grew silent as four fetching girls walked in. One of them, blonde-haired with curls falling attractively to the sides of her face, leaned close to the mayor to speak to him. He turned and gestured at Mark. Mark's heart fluttered in his belly. Mayor Clarence had not been wrong. Miss Jessica was very pretty. He and the other men stood as the group approached. To his surprise, his heartbeat thrashed in his ears as he and Miss Jessica looked at each other. Gentlemen, your ladies are finally here, Mayor Clarence boomed and proceeded to match each of the men with their brides. Shall we sit over there? Miss Jessica asked, pointing to a table for two set against the wall. This was no shy girl, Mark mused. He found himself looking forward to her company. He could not remember keeping company with a forthright woman who was not a saloon girl. It would be a new experience. Certainly, Mark said and led the way. The mayor nodded at Mark to show his approval. Mark pulled out a chair for Miss Jessica. He knew his manners, and although he didn't intend to get serious with this girl, after all, Lucy Stapleton had his attention, he did want to make a gentlemanly impression. How do you like Valentine Town so far? Mark asked when they settled down onto their chairs. Jessica clasped her hands together and smiled. I imagine I will like it a lot. As soon as I got off the train, I was determined that Valentine Town will be my cherished home. The people around here do seem friendly enough, as the mayor promised. Guilt flooded him. He should never have let this ruse go on for so long. This pert gal across from him thought their marriage was a sure deal. He was going to disappoint her sorely. But then, maybe not. She would find someone else to marry her. The ratio of men to women in Valentine Town and other neighboring towns was dismal. A girl as pretty as Miss Jessica would be snapped up in no time. The thought made him slightly uncomfortable, a feeling he ignored. How long have you lived here? Mayor Clarence told me you were a businessman. Mark chuckled. I wouldn't describe myself as a businessman. I'm a rancher at heart. Her blue eyes widened, and for a few seconds, he got lost in them and forgot what he was about to say. You have a ranch then? Jessica prompted. Mark was about to tell her all about his dreams to own and run the biggest spread Colorado had ever seen, and then he caught himself. Miss Jessica was not going to be in his life for long. It was best to keep their relationship casual. Unfortunately, no, he said. You must have found the journey very exhausting, Miss Jessica. Please call me Jessica, she said. It was all right. I had good company, and I was looking forward to coming here. I spent the journey dreaming of Valentine Town, and now I'm here. That's fine, Mark said, now itching to get away. She was too pretty, and the only way to keep himself on track was to see as little of her as possible. Mayor Clarence told me you were a successful miner, too. That you had luck with finding gold, she said. Mark threw a quick glance at the mayor, who was engrossed in what seemed like a deep conversation with one of the other men. He should not have divulged his wealth to Jessica. No wonder she seemed keen on him. Any woman would be interested in a man who could keep his family fed and clothed and sheltered for the rest of their lives. He hoped the mayor had not used his wealth to bait Jessica Dunahue. He looked at her and shrugged. I was just lucky to strike a vein. Perhaps one day, you'll tell me about it, she said. It must have been so exciting. Despite himself, he grinned, remembering the moment of disbelief when he had discovered the gold layered between rocks. It had changed his life. But that was then and this was now, and he had decided on which lady he was going to court, and it was not going to be Jessica Dunahue. Are you hungry? Mark asked and stood up. I am, she said. They have a daily special here. I hope that will be all right. She nodded and gave him a smile. He went to the counter, and as he waited to give their order, he watched Jessica covertly. She possessed the kind of beauty that stopped men in their tracks. A girl like that was probably used to having things go her way. How long would she last in Valentine Town? He had expected a few complaints with regards to the town and boarding house, but so far she hadn't said a negative word. It wouldn't be long though before the complaints began coming. Everyone in town was aware that they didn't measure up to Eastern standards. Not that they much cared. There was a rawness to the West, an excitement, a sense of forging a new path that had caught everyone's heart and mind out there. The folks that couldn't get on board with it, left, either trying further west, or scurrying back to what was known back east. Mr. Thrush? Dorothy, the cook, barked, and Mark gave his order. What plans do we have for tomorrow? Jessica asked, and Mark returned to the table. Plans, he said. Yes, what shall we do tomorrow? She had spunk. Most well-brought-up young women waited until the gentleman offered or asked. Disgruntled admiration flowed through him. Well, he said, thinking fast. He had not thought about the next day. I have some business to attend to in the morning. We can meet in the afternoon, Jessica said quickly. He inhaled sharply. Staying away from her was going to be more difficult than he had thought. All right. She beamed. Perfect. You can show me around the town and introduce me to the folk around here. Chapter 3. Mark kept glancing at the food on her plate, and Jessica knew he wanted to leave. She swallowed her disappointment and mopped the last of her bean stew with a chunk of bread. Using her bread as a utensil was a new experience, and she quite liked it. She had watched Mark as he ate and had followed his eating style. That was very filling, Jessica said, and pushed away her plate. Yes, Dorothy is a cranky one, but she cooks well, Mark said. I'm afraid I have to leave. I'm staying in Ashland, and it's a good hour's ride from Valentine Town. Oh, but I thought you lived here. I probably will in the future, he said and stood up. At the moment, I live in a boarding house in Ashland. Jessica made to stand. Like the perfect gentleman, Mark came to her side and pushed back her chair so she could get up. She caught a whiff of the outdoor smell that clung to him. She longed to close her eyes and inhale more of it. Instead, she slipped her hand into his offered arm, and they walked out of the diner together. She felt shy as they stood facing each other outside the stairs that led to the second floor. He towered over her, and to see his face, she had to tilt her head. He was a handsome man with dark eyes and an intense look that seemed to peer right inside her soul. Get yourself a good rest, he said, breaking the silence. I will, Jessica replied, though now she did not feel tired at all. The food had rejuvenated her. If only he would stay longer. There was so much she would have liked to know about him. He had not told her much about himself, and he still felt very much a stranger. He hadn't asked her about herself either, she realized with a jolt. Mark was unlike any other man she had ever met. His skin was leathered and told of a person who spent a lot of his time outdoors. He was more masculine than other men, and standing next to him, she felt safe and protected. She promised herself to get to know him better the following day. She waited for a kiss on the cheek or some other form of goodbye. He took a step back and she realized that was her cue to go. Goodbye then. See you tomorrow. She felt a distinct sense of letdown. Why was he being so reticent with her? Almost standoffish. It didn't make sense. Didn't he want a wife? Perhaps he was just shy. He nodded at her and smiled. She turned and climbed up the stairs. She did not look back once, as she didn't want to seem too overly eager. But inside, she was thrilled with the mayor's choice for her. Mark was everything she had dreamed of: handsome, considerate, and by all accounts, hard-working. Jessica made for the small parlor and went straight to the window and looked down. Her breath caught as she watched Mark and the mayor speaking. Mark looked downright dashing as he spoke, gesturing with his hands. He looked up, and their eyes met. The world faded to nothing as she felt herself pulled by his gaze. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and left. Jessica realized she had been holding her breath. Voices sounded in the reception area, and seconds later, the parlor door opened and the other three girls walked in, chattering excitedly. Oh, he is so handsome, Pearl gushed. I would marry my fiancé tomorrow if he asked, Dorothea said, and they giggled. How was it for you, Jessica? Jessica forced a smile. It went very well, I think. But Mark was a difficult man to read. She had no idea how their meeting had gone, not really. He had looked at her as if he found her pretty, but then at the end, he had been in a rush to leave. She didn't know what to think. Back home, there had been a few young men eager to court her, and they had shown their feelings readily. Mark did not seem eager to be that transparent, but he had looked at her in a way that said he found her attractive. At least, that was a start. I bet he fell in love with you right away, Idella said. It's difficult to tell on the first meeting, Jessica ventured. Well, my fellow's quite keen, Dorothea said. He wants us to make plans for our marriage ceremony. I asked for a few weeks for us to get to know one another. He is keen, Pearl said with a giggle. Jessica felt on the edge of the group as they all spoke excitedly about their first meetings with their fiancés. Her own first meeting seemed to have been the only one that had not gone as expected. As she listened to the girls, she questioned everything. Why hadn't Mark been interested in making plans for their future like all the other gentlemen? He's picking me up in the morning to go and see his cottage, Idella said, and all the other girls confirmed that they too would be out for the day with their fiancés. They turned to Jessica. Mark will come over in the afternoon, she offered lamely. He has some business to attend to in the morning. What will you do all by yourself? Pearl asked. I'll keep you company. What about your plans? Jessica said. I can change them to match yours, Pearl said. Tears sprang to Jessica's eyes. She was not usually an overly emotional person, but Pearl's kind gesture unraveled something inside her. She and Pearl had been strangers not that long ago, and now here she was, willing to change her plans to keep Jessica company. No, I don't want you to do that, Jessica insisted. I appreciate the offer. But I'll keep myself busy writing letters back home. If you're sure, Pearl said. I'm sure, Jessica said and smiled brightly. Chapter 4. It's a good thing the snow has given us some respite, Old Man Stapleton said as he took a break from digging the hole where the juniper post would go. We'll get most of the southern fence repaired. I believe so, Mark said, eyeing the expanse of pasture covered with snow. He took the shovel and scooped out the soil from the hole. Mr. Stapleton cleared his throat, a sign Mark knew well now. The man had something serious he wished to say. I never really expressed my gratitude, Mr. Stapleton began, his voice cracking. I don't know what would have become of us if you never extended a hand, and for that I shall always be grateful. I'll begin repaying the loan. Don't worry about it, Mark interrupted. You'll repay the loan when you're ready, and there's no rush whatsoever. Besides, we'll be family soon. A disease had wiped out most of Stapleton's herd, and the family had been on the brink of ruin. On hearing about it, he'd approached Mr. Stapleton and offered him a loan to restock his cattle. It had taken several meetings to convince the old man to agree to his help. It was while visiting that Mark had met his youngest daughter, Lucy. Now, the whole Stapleton family knew Mark's intentions of courting Lucy Stapleton. Lucy had barely exchanged more than a dozen words with Mark, but Mr. Stapleton had urged him to be patient with her. She was very shy around strangers, but from what Mark had observed so far, she would be a wonderful and capable wife. She'll make you a good wife, my Lucy. Her mother has taught her well, Mr. Stapleton said. They worked steadily through the morning, mending fences. After replacing the rotten posts with new ones, they stretched 4 wires post to post. Shall we check on the northern fences? Mark asked when they were finished. I'll do that myself. Why don't you go to the house and have a warm mug of coffee and a visit with Lucy? I don't want to get a scolding from the missus for keeping you to myself for so long. Don't mind if I do go on in for a spell, Mark said and mounted his horse. He guided his mare back through the pastures. The wind howled around him, and he was glad when he sighted the house. When he reached the yard, he dismounted and tied his horse to a hitching post. He rapped loudly on the back door, and moments later, it swung open. Mark, what a pleasure to see you, Mrs. Stapleton said, her face wreathed in smiles. Hurry on in, it's too cold out there. Thank you, Mark said, sighing happily as he was immediately engulfed by the warm air from the kitchen. Lucy stood with her back to him facing the sink. Hello, Lucy, Mark said. She turned around and gave him a shy smile. When one looked at Lucy, there was not that sense of wonder as with Jessica. Lucy had regular features, and she was rather quiet or shy, Mark didn't know which. Come into the parlor, Mrs. Stapleton said behind him. Lucy will bring you coffee and visit with you. He left the kitchen and went through to the parlor. Mrs. Stapleton left after ensuring he was comfortable. His mind meandered to Jessica, and he wondered what she was doing. He hoped she'd had a good night's sleep and wasn't feeling homesick. Lucy appeared a few minutes later, bearing a tray with 2 mugs of steaming coffee. Thank you so much, Mark said as she handed him his mug. She smiled in response and then sat on the chair near the door, the one furthest from him. Did he frighten her? Are you having a good day? Mark said. I hope this weather is not giving you the blues. She looked at him properly for the first time, a brow on her forehead. Why would it give me the blues? Isn't winter this way every year? He nodded, feeling foolish. Yes, of course. With nothing else to do, he observed her. She would have been pretty had her eyes not been so wide apart. But it was not her beauty he was interested in. It was her character. This was a girl who had grown up in the West and on a ranch, and she knew what was expected of her as a wife. She was the kind of girl he needed for a wife. "What have you been doing all morning?" he asked. "The same thing I do most days," Lucy said. "I helped Pa milk the cows in the morning and then plucked the eggs from the chicken coop. Later on, I helped Ma prepare and serve breakfast." "I'm sure your folks appreciate all your help," Mark said, coming up with nothing else to say. A shade of pink covered her cheeks. "Thank you. Where's everyone else?" "John and Thomas went to Oakley. Pa sent them on an errand, and the other 2 younger boys are out in the pastures." She spoke in a monotone that Mark found a bit wearisome. Funny how he'd never noticed that before. He felt the strain of trying to keep the conversation going, but with time, they would surely get more comfortable with each other. What Lucy needed was time, and he would give her plenty of that. "What do you do when you're not helping around the ranch?" Mark asked, hoping to learn another side of his prospective fiancé. A brow sprung to her forehead. She stared at him questioningly. "I don't understand what you're asking. What do you do for enjoyment?" "Mr. Thrush, my pa told me what's expected of me and I know everything about running a home." There was fire in there somewhere, Mark thought, intrigued by the flash of defiance on her eyes. "Please call me Mark. I know your pa has taught you many things, but I'd like to know what you're like as a person." "All right then," she said. "I like taking walks in the woods." He smiled. "I like walking, too. Perhaps we can do that the next time I come over." She lowered her glance and mumbled a response. Disappointment washed through him. He had expected a more enthusiastic response. He washed down the rest of the coffee and stood up. "Please thank your mother for me, the coffee was lovely," Mark said. She smiled and rose quickly to her feet, making Mark suspect she was eager for him to leave. He pushed away the thought. Surely, if she were not interested in him, she would have said so and her father would have enlightened him. Galloping away from the ranch, Mark's heart pounded as his thoughts turned to Jessica. He had made plans to take her to the church on top of the hill. Mark knew for a fact that Preacher James was away tending to the spiritual needs in other corners of the county, so they'd be safe to visit the place. Because if the preacher would be there, the conversation would likely go toward wedding plans. He chuckled softly to himself. The old church soothed something in him, and he wanted to go there more for his sake than to show Jessica. Still, a part of him hoped that she would like it and the rest of Valentine Town. He snapped the reins and urged his mare to a faster gallop. Chapter 5. Jessica stooped to peer at her reflection in the small, chipped mirror on the dresser. She adjusted her curls, straightened her Green Day dress, and when satisfied with her appearance, she slipped on a coat and left her room. The second floor was completely empty and even the reception table sat unmanned. She bounded down the stairs and just as she turned toward the diner entrance, she slowed down. Her heart pounded as she recognized Mark's back as he tied his horse to a hitching post. He straightened up and, as if feeling her stare, swiveled around. A smile lit his face, and she found herself responding warmly. A feeling of breathlessness came over her, and she hurried to him. "I'm a little early, but I finished my business a little earlier than I had planned." Her insides trembled. "That's a good thing as I have no company for lunch." "We can't have that," Mark said and offered his arm. She slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. His hand felt strong and steady as they strolled to the diner entrance. He led her to a quiet corner and after pulling out her chair, he left to give their order. Jessica had worried that her exhaustion the previous day had exaggerated her first impression of Mark. If anything, she had underplayed his good looks. A sliver of excitement slithered through her as she took in his wide shoulders and slim waist. Her eyes darted around the diner, afraid that the other diners could read her thoughts. What sort of decent lady harbored such thoughts about a man she barely knew? "How did your morning business go?" Jessica asked when he returned to the table. "It went as expected," he said and promptly changed the topic. He probably thought he would bore her if he shared the details of his work. If only he knew. She had loved listening to her father talk about his day at the law firm. Over time, she would encourage Mark to talk about his workday in the same manner. "Where are the other ladies?" he asked. "They all went off for the day with their fiancés," she said. He shifted in his chair and glanced away. "I spent the morning writing letters to my sisters," Jessica volunteered, chatting to fill the silence. The waitress brought their food. Glad for the distraction, Jessica took a bite of the roast beef and before she could stop herself, made a face. "It's a little tough, isn't it?" Mark commented, chewing hard on his own food. "It'll make our teeth grow stronger," Jessica quipped, and Mark burst out laughing. He had the most delightful laugh, she mused as she stopped chewing to watch him. He threw his head back as if immersing his whole self in mirth. Mark made as if to speak, but before he could say a word, a voice at the entrance drew her attention. She turned to look at the owner of the voice and drew a sharp breath. "Are you all right?" Mark asked. She let out a nervous laugh, and her pulse returned to normal. "That gentleman who came in, the gray-haired one, he looks and speaks like my father." Nostalgia for home came over her, and her eyes filled with tears. This was looking to be much harder than she had imagined in those weeks when she had excitedly planned for her trip. "You miss home?" Mark asked. She nodded and tried to smile. "No point in missing home though, because my parents will be away for the next great while." "Really? Where will they be?" "Visiting with relatives in Europe," she said. "The plan had been that I accompany them, but I wanted something different for myself." Mark nodded. "Sometimes, we want different things from what our loved ones want from us." "Do you have siblings?" How little they knew about each other. "Yes, 4 brothers and 3 sisters. All married and living in Boston with their families." "You're the first in your family to venture away from the nest?" Mark asked. She nodded. "Yes, and now my parents. But then, they plan to return and I don't. I imagine I won't hear from them for a couple of months. Perhaps, they'll visit you when they return from their travels." "That would be wonderful," Jessica said and turned her attention back to Mark. "What about yourself? Where's your family?" He shifted his gaze to a point behind her head. "I grew up in Connecticut with my parents and 3 brothers." "So, you came from back east, too? From a farm?" His gaze bounced back to her and a ghost of a smile formed at the sides of his mouth. "Nothing close to that. My father was a station master, and our home was on the 2nd floor of the depot." "No. I wouldn't have guessed," Jessica said, and her earlier sadness dissipated. Mark chuckled. "I did. My brothers and I made the track our playing ground." She was delighted. She knew station masters lived in quarters off the depot, but she had never seen a family there. "It must have worried your mother sick." "After my father retired, Mother refused to even get on a train." Jessica chuckled. "I'm sure she has never come to visit you." "No, but I still hope she'll come one day. Father is not that eager to get on trains either. They retired to a small farm in Connecticut. I can't imagine how exciting it would be to live in a depot." "Was it noisy at night?" Jessica asked and leaned on the table. He shrugged. "A person gets used to the noise, and it fades into the background. Besides, there weren't many trains passing by at night. Most come during the day. My brothers and I used to like looking down the platform from the 2nd-story porch and watch people waiting or disembarking from the trains." She imagined the 4 boys huddled together on the porch and thought back to her own childhood. As the last born, the others had treated her as a baby, and by the time she was old enough to play, they had moved on from childish games. "Did you ever want to get on a train like those people?" A shadow came over Mark's face and then he beamed. "What child wouldn't? I promised myself that one day I would get on a train and go with it to the end of the world." She chuckled and leaned forward further. "You came here to look for gold? That's all everybody from the East comes here to do. To try their luck at finding gold." "That's not true." "I didn't come here for gold," Jessica said jokingly. His answer was to stare at her solemnly. Chapter 6. It's a fine day to be out, Mayor Clarence commented after an exchange of greetings. Enjoy your day. Thank you, Mark and Jessica replied in unison as they continued their walk down Main Street. For a winter day in early February, it was a fine day, with a weak sun and almost clear blue skies. Mark felt pleased to have met the mayor. It meant that when he walked away from Jessica, the mayor would know he had given it his very best. He stole a glance at Jessica now, her face a perfect profile of concentration. They soon left the town and walked up a wagon trail up the hill. Mark spotted the church steeple and pointed it out to Jessica. You can see it from a great distance away, he said. That's why most churches have long steeples. So that people can find their way to the house of God. I have never given churches a lot of thought. They are simply places of prayer for me, Jessica said. Did you attend services a lot when you were young? Oh, yes. Sometimes I think I spent more time in church than at home. Mother was very active in church, and she took all of us with her every time. What about you? We went to church, but my parents were not overly religious, she said. I think Mother enjoyed the socializing aspect of it rather than any spiritual gain. Mark burst out laughing. The church stood on a small knoll and was surrounded by tall pines. They made their way into the church compound. Is it all right that we're here? Jessica whispered. Yes, it's fine. We're here alone, I believe. The church doors are left open during the day for anyone who might want to pray or spend time with God. He guided Jessica around the church building to his favorite spot at the back of the church. A bench overlooked a tiny garden. They sat down side by side and listened to the wind as it ruffled the pine trees. It's very peaceful here, Jessica said with a sigh. One could easily nap if it wasn't so cold. Mark beamed. It's a good place to think and plan. Do you come here often? He gave her question some thought. He had come after he discovered the gold vein and known he had become a very wealthy man. He had also come when he decided the time had come to think of getting a wife. I come when I have big decisions to make, which is not very often. For a second, Mark wished that his courtship of Jessica was real. She was easy to speak to, and she seemed keen on him. His belly nodded with regret. If only Jessica had been a local girl used to the ways of the rough frontier. For now, it all seemed like an adventure to her. Her attitude would change once she was married and in her own home without the comforts she was used to. Worse still, he had already committed himself to Lucy Stapleton. He would hate to disappoint her parents, especially her elderly father. He caught himself. Surely it was Lucy he was most afraid of disappointing, not her parents. In a sudden movement, Jessica jumped to her feet. I'm afraid I'm not very good at sitting still. He chuckled and stood up. Fair enough. Do you want to walk around? We can walk to the river, though it might be frozen at this time of year. Yes, please, Jessica said, clasping her hands. Her enthusiasm was catching, and his heart shrank at the realization that it wouldn't be long before she found someone else. He shrugged off his disturbing thoughts and offered her his arm. He had known right from the start that Jessica would belong to someone else. It would be foolish to allow himself to develop feelings for her. He suddenly realized that Valentine's Day wasn't all that far off. Jessica would have found someone else by then, there was no doubt in his mind. It was best to enjoy this moment as he and Jessica didn't have a future together. They left the church compound and followed a path into the woods. Jessica closed the gap between them so that their sides touched as they walked. Warmth spread through his body and his throat tightened with the contact. I've never been in a forest before, she said, her voice shaky. Are there animals? Yes, many. As big as the trees, and they roar so loud, everyone in town hears them, Mark said, trying to suppress a smile. She gave him a suspicious look. Really? I'm jesting, he said, and she gave him a small push. He squeezed her hand. Most animals are out in the prairie. These woods are not extensive, just a small patch, though it might not seem that way when you're walking. In hot summer months, families picnicked in the woods to get away from the blazing sun. Further on, where the trees were denser, courting couples took walks and stole kisses away from disapproving eyes. He suddenly wished that he and Jessica were an ordinary courting couple. At that moment, they approached the frozen river and Jessica exhaled sharply. At first glance, the river appeared as chunks of broken glass. The tall trees reflected on the surface. Jessica slipped her hand out of his, leaving Mark feeling as if he had lost a part of his own body. She moved to the edge of the river and bent down to touch the ice. She gave a little yelp and turned to him with a grin. "Come and touch." "I have an idea of how cold it is," Mark said and folded his hands behind his body. "You're frightened," she teased. As she turned, a loose root caught at her leg and before Mark could do anything, she tumbled backward into the river. She landed on the frozen surface of the river with a loud thud and began to slip away. Mark reached out and grabbed onto her arm, and then he gathered her in his arms and lifted her up and away from danger. Only after he deposited her down did he realize that all the while she had been laughing. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she shook with laughter. "This is very embarrassing," she said, and after seeing she was all right, Mark laughed too. They stood there laughing each time Mark stopped. Jessica's peals of laughter got him started again. Chapter 7. Jessica's step felt light as they headed back down Main Street, and her chest bubbled with happiness. Walking beside Mark made her feel 6 feet tall and she wondered what it would feel like to actually be married to him. To be introduced as Mrs. Thrush. To have the freedom to touch him whenever she wanted. She could not remember ever having such a wonderful time with a man. The young men who had courted her back in Boston had not been even half as interesting. With his bulky frame and confident manner, Mark exuded masculinity. He made her feel like a desirable woman when he looked at her. "Thank you for a lovely afternoon," she said, looking up at him. His dark eyes twinkled as he met her gaze, and he seemed almost surprised. "I enjoyed myself too, especially when you sat on the river." Jessica laughed. "I wouldn't call it sitting." His countenance grew solemn. "You didn't hurt yourself though, did you?" Her heart pounded wildly as he stared at her, waiting for an answer. How could a person affect her so? His eyes seemed to see right into her heart. Could he see her growing feelings for him? "No," she mumbled, her throat constricted. At that moment, someone close by coughed, jolting her back to their surroundings. "Good evening, ma'am," a gentleman in a black suit and a hat said, bowing slightly. "Mark." "Francis." Mark boomed. They moved to the side to allow other people to walk by. "When did you get back?" "Oh, how rude," Mark said and proceeded to introduce Jessica. Her joy went down a notch as Mark simply introduced her by her name. She had hoped that he would introduce her as his fiancée. "Don't forget the meeting in the mayor's office tomorrow," Francis said. After a bit of further conversation, they parted ways. A few steps ahead, they stopped again. A young man about 18 years of age greeted them, staring at Jessica as though trying to decide who she was. "Oliver, meet Jessica. She's one of the 4 mail-order brides who arrived in town a few days ago," Mark said, his voice rigid. The friendliness and warmth they had shared moments ago did not reflect in his voice. He introduced her as one would a casual acquaintance, and it left Jessica confused. She searched his face. "Good day," the young man mumbled without meeting her eyes. "I'm doing my duty by ensuring the ladies all feel at home here in Valentine," Mark told him. "Pass my regards to everyone, and be sure to let them know I'll come around tomorrow evening." The boy nodded and continued on his way. They reached the boarding house and when she turned to say goodbye to Mark, she saw it then. She saw the invisible wall he had placed around himself. "What is it?" Jessica blurted out. "Are you upset about something?" "Not at all," Mark said, his tone serious, distracted. "I just have a lot to do before night time." "Thank you for a good day." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away. She watched him hurry down the street and then lost sight of him as he entered the livery. Shaking her head, Jessica headed up the stairs to the boarding house. Not wanting to be alone, she went into the parlor, hoping to find one of the other girls. All three were seated, sipping on cups of tea. "Jessica, we were getting worried about you. No one knew where you went," Dorothea said. "Let me pour you some tea." "You look like you need some," Pearl murmured. Jessica collapsed on a chair, exhausted from her myriad of conflicting emotions. She looked at the girls, all showing concern with their furrowed brows as they waited for her to speak. "I was with Mark," she said. "We went to the church and then to the frozen river." She noticed the glances the girls exchanged. "Jessica, all of us have been hearing talk about Mark," Dorothea said. "What? What is it?" Jessica said, accepting the cup of tea from Pearl. "Well," Dorothea said. "Just things to do with his seriousness with you." Jessica stiffened and carefully placed her tea on the table. "What things?" Dorothea cast a glance at Pearl and then turned to look at Jessica. "It seems that your Mark is courting another girl in Ashland. Her name is Lucy Stapleton." Jessica's heart dropped, but she tried to suppress her reaction. "But that can't be true. Mark is honest. He wouldn't do such a thing. Besides, the mayor would know, wouldn't he?" But even as she defended him, Jessica realized that if this rumor was true, it would explain a lot. Tense silence filled the room. Jessica looked at each of the girls, silently begging one of them to reassure her that what Dorothea had said was not true. Then an image of the young man Mark had introduced as Oliver came to mind. Mark had introduced her as one of the mail-order brides. Nagging doubt filled her mind. The girls had no reason to lie to her. Tears filled her eyes as a lot of things about Mark started to make sense. Like how he didn't seem to want to spend time with her as the other men did with the girls. That feeling that she got when she was with him, that he was not fully committed to her. "Don't cry, Jessica," Pearl said. "There are many other suitable men here." Pearl was right, there were other men in Valentine. There was only one problem. I don't want anyone else. I like Mark. I think he likes me, too." She squared her shoulders. What had happened to her dream of being married by Valentine's Day? To have her own sweetheart by then. She wrapped her arms around her waist to contain a shiver making its way up from her feet. "What will you do?" Idella said, speaking up for the first time. Grim determination came over her. She had yet to come across a situation which she could not resolve. She would win Mark over one way or the other. By the time she was finished, he would be swooning over her. "I'll win him from the other girl," Jessica said. "Oh, Jessica," Pearl said. "Is he really worth it?" Mark's image popped into her mind. His tall, strong body, his angular handsome face and the delightful way he laughed. He could be solemn and then silly in the next moment. He was easy to talk to, and he listened to her when she spoke. She turned to Pearl. "Oh, yes. Mark Thrush is very much worth it." Chapter 8. "You seem really taken with the mayor's idea," Frances said to Mark as they walked out of the mayor's office and stood on the street. "I am," Mark said. "I've been thinking of a ranch, but a slaughterhouse sounds perfect for me. I'll get to be in the meat business but not be at the mercy of the seasons. I'll have to give this a lot of thought." "You'd have to live here in Valentine Town to establish and run a slaughterhouse," Frances pointed out. "Yes, I realize that. I have a plot of land here, remember," Mark said. One of the first things he had bought were 2 lots, one in Valentine Town and another in Ashland. That way, he had options on where to establish a home or business. "Here comes your lady," Frances said and excused himself before Jessica reached them. Guilt gripped Mark as he watched her face light up. He had to let her know that their relationship could not work. He wouldn't string her along anymore. She was a lovely girl, and she deserved someone who was free to court her. "Mark," she cried when she got closer. "How lovely to run into you. I forgot to tell you about the tea party I'm having this afternoon at the boarding house parlor." He took in her flushed appearance. Her big blue eyes blazed with excitement. What was it about Jessica that lightened his heart and brought a smile to his face even when he had nothing to smile about? A tea party? I don't think I've ever been to one of those, Mark said, her enthusiasm catching. What do people do? She cocked her head to the side and a blonde curl escaped the confines of her hat. He reached out without thinking and tucked it behind her ear. His hand brushed her skin and pinpricks of awareness lit up his awareness. A warning stirred in his brain, but he pushed it away. Let me see. People socialize and spend time getting to know one another better if they are courting, she said, her cheeks reddening as she spoke. He should have spoken at that moment, Mark realized. Much later when he arrived at the tea party, Jessica had changed into a cream dress that showed off her curves. She stood at the top of the stairs as though she had been waiting for him. The wind blew her golden curls, and she resembled an angel as she smiled down at him. Bracing himself, he went up the stairs, clutching a bunch of wild flowers he had picked on the way from the Stapleton ranch. In truth, he'd been surprised there were any flowers at all that early in the year, but he'd seen the tiny little purple things clustered near a large rock. These are for you, he said to Jessica. She took them, closed her eyes and sniffed. The rest of the world faded as he became attuned to every movement Jessica made. Her eyes opened and she smiled, lighting up her face. He exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. Thank you, how very kind of you. She was a true lady, the kind that would entertain his guests with poise and grace. If she stayed. But then, he hardly had many guests who would require such fine handling. And most households in the West did not even have indoor plumbing. How would she cope with such inconveniences? He broke the moment and shifted his glance to an area above Jessica's head. Please come in right on in, she said in a warm tone. He followed her past the reception desk and into the parlor. A wooden table brimmed with cakes and sandwiches and a tray with cups and a kettle. The other 3 girls, whom he had met once or twice, sat around the room, together with their fiancés. Mark shook hands with everyone as greetings were exchanged. One of the men had attended the meeting in the mayor's office earlier that day, and he pulled Mark aside for a private conversation. I hear you're very interested in the slaughterhouse, he said. As they spoke, Mark kept an eye on Jessica. She busied herself serving tea and the tiniest sandwiches he had ever seen. And then she moved close to serve him. I'll probably need 100 of these to feel any effect, he whispered into her ear when she offered him the plate of sandwiches. She giggled, a sweet sound that cheered him. They are not meant to fill you up, she whispered back. Later, the couples gravitated toward the window, looking out and commenting on the weather. Mark stood with Jessica. She was a delight to be with, but she did not belong to him. It was time to put the appropriate distance between them. I'll be going away tomorrow, Mark said. She reacted immediately, fear clouding her eyes. His chest tightened at the shadow of sadness in her expression. Where are you going? Are you sure you're coming back? The decision to go was an impetuous one, but he realized it was the right thing to do. He wanted to visit a few slaughterhouses and speak with the owners to get some insight. His trip would of course serve 2 purposes: give Jessica time to get to know other men in town and give him time to get over his feelings for her. There was no doubt in his mind that he was beginning to fall in love with her, and that simply wouldn't do. How could he possibly disappoint the Stapletons? There's something we need to talk about, he said and held her gaze. A ball of pain formed in his chest. It was time to end the courtship that should not have even begun with Jessica. It was not fair to keep on when he intended to court and marry another lady. Can we not talk about it when you come back from your trip, she said, her eyes imploring him. He swallowed a hard knot of dread. He could not bring his mouth to form the words that would be his final goodbye. Instead, he found himself telling her about the meeting with the mayor. Yes, I'm thinking of investing in a slaughterhouse here in Valentine Town. It would serve the ranches in the adjoining towns. Are there many ranches around here? Jessica asked, relief showing on her face at the change of subject. Yes, Mark said, and immediately launched into a discussion of the advantages of Valentine Town as the site for a slaughterhouse. Chapter 9. Jessica's eyes searched the main street, alert for Mark's return. Since his departure, she had lost interest in the town's happenings, and she lived for the moment when he would come back. Everything around her had taken on a shade of wariness. He had said he would be back in a few days, but it had now been a week and there was still no sign of him. A part of her dreaded his return. What if he ended their courtship? He had wanted to talk about something serious, and she had a premonition that it would not be good news. Still, it had to be better than this waiting. Her life had come to a grinding halt with his departure. Have you been here all morning? She whipped around to find Dorothea, Idella, and Pearl at the doorway. Dorothea had her hands on her hips as she waited for an answer. Pearl came to Jessica and placed an arm on her shoulder. This isn't right, Pearl said softly. You can't spend a whole week waiting for Mark. This is ridiculous. You should be enjoying your new life here. I think you should forget about Mark and be open to courtship by another young man. Not responding and feeling wound up with tension, Jessica paced the length of the small parlor, pausing now and then to look outside the window. Didn't they understand that she was in love with Mark? That he was who she wanted? She could hardly concentrate on anything else. But any day, he was either going to propose to her or end things between them. The waiting was driving her mad. I agree with Pearl, Dorothea said. There are so many men who want to court you. Take Matthew Brown. I know that he likes you. Jessica recoiled as though she had been physically hit. I don't want another man to court me. I know Mark has feelings for me. He just needs time. I know what I'll do. I'll throw a party and then he'll see what a good wife I'd be. Stop it, Idella said, and the room went quiet. Listen to yourself, Jessica. You've been chasing after that man since the first day we arrived. That's not how it ought to be. Men do the courting, not the other way around. You're beautiful and good and kind. Any man would be lucky to have you as his wife. If Mark can't see that, then he doesn't deserve you. Something in Jessica unraveled. The quiet but confident tone of Idella's words did it. Images of her accidentally running into Mark outside the mayor's office jumped to her mind. The constant uncertainty in Mark's features. He did not share her feelings. He probably loved the other girl. What was her name? The truth hit her like a physical object to her chest. She was in love with a man who was in love with someone else. Tears welled, and unable to hold them in, she broke into noisy sobs. Arms went around her and gentle voices whirled around her. Eventually, the pain in her chest subsided, and the tears slowed. She took a handkerchief from Dorothea and mopped her face. Let's all go for a walk, Pearl said. The fresh air will do us good. What if Mark comes by, and I'm not here, Jessica said. Then he'll wait as normal people do or come back later, Dorothea said firmly. Embarrassment flooded Jessica. What was the matter with her? She had spent a whole week looking out the window for Mark, barely eating or sleeping. She was waiting for a man who did not love her, and yet, she couldn't let go of the dream of being Mark's wife. Her heart ached as if she had been stabbed. How long would it take to forget about him? All right. I'll go get my coat, Jessica finally agreed. She rejoined the girls as they walked down the porch steps. Doesn't it feel good to be out in the air? Dorothea asked, and Jessica nodded. They stepped onto the main street, and to Jessica's surprise, the other three girls edged closer to her, forming a protective semicircle around her. She saw a girl then, rather plain-looking with straight brown hair and a rather shapeless brown dress. That's Lucy Stapleton, Dorothea said. Air left Jessica's body. She stared at the girl, and at that moment, it dawned on her that Lucy Stapleton was not a girl she could compete with for Mark's affections. Every day, Jessica styled her hair in ways that flattered her face, and she wore well-tailored fashionable clothes. She had been raised to be a good wife by complimenting her husband's strengths. Her posture was ramrod straight, and she oozed confidence when she spoke or walked. She could run a big house and organize the servants. How then could she compete with a girl who wore dull clothes and paid no mind to her hair or appearance? Whatever Mark loved about Lucy Stapleton, it was not in her appearance. He loved the person she was, and that, Jessica could not compete with. In that moment, time seemed to slow down as she grappled with the truth. She barely noticed as a buggy raced down the street just as Lucy Stapleton stepped out to cross the street. Then she saw sharply what was about to happen. A scream stuck in Jessica's throat as the horse pulling the buggy swerved and missed Lucy, but the body of the buggy it pulled hit Lucy's lower body. A blood-curdling cry filled the air, and Lucy collapsed. The buggy careened on, not stopping. The four girls rushed to Lucy's side as she lay sprawled on the ground. To Jessica's relief, Lucy was moaning when they approached her. Jessica winced at the odd angle of Lucy's right leg. "We need a doctor." "I think her leg is broken," Jessica said, and someone from across the street yelled that they were going to fetch him. "We must get her out of the mud and into the boarding house, but we'd better wait for the doc." She took off her light cape and draped it over Lucy's shoulders, hoping to keep her warm. Chapter 10. Heart pounding, Mark raced from the depot down Main Street to the boarding house. Please let her be all right. Lucy rarely visited Valentine Town. She had probably come looking for him and then gotten involved in the accident. There was no one else to blame but himself if anything happened to her. In a few minutes, he was hurrying up the stairs of the boarding house. "Where is she?" he asked Mrs. Williams at the reception desk. "She's in the last room on the right." He did not wait for her to finish. He hurried down the corridor, and when he reached the end of it, he pushed the door. He came to a halt as two faces stared at him. He inhaled sharply at the sight of Jessica, her hair held back and her blue eyes looking at him with such raw emotions. He tore his eyes away and looked at Lucy. She gave him a weak smile. He shut the door and went to her side. "The station master told me what happened," Mark said. "How are you feeling? Where did you get hurt?" "I'm feeling better," Lucy said. "But it's thanks to Miss Jessica's quick thinking. She and her friends took care of me and called for document. My leg hurts, but it wasn't broke." He turned to look at Jessica. "Thank you for taking care of her." He cleared his throat. Before he could say another word, Jessica stood up. She looked down at Lucy and smiled. "You'll be fine now that Mark is here." Lucy touched Jessica's hand. "Yes, thank you." She turned to him. "My folks will be worried about me. I told them I'd be back by evening." "What were you doing in town?" he asked. "I was looking for you. You took so long, and I got worried." Her words were like a sword to his side. Now, he had two ladies with feelings for him and one was bound to get hurt. And to make it worse, it was all his fault. "Shall I take you home?" he said. "I can get a buggy from the livery." As he excused himself, he could feel Jessica's eyes burning into him, but he refused to meet her eyes, afraid of what he would see. Disgust and betrayal for sure. He'd never felt like such a total heel. He hurried out of the boarding house, glad to have a task he could concentrate on. After he took Lucy home to her family, he would deal with everything else. He returned 15 minutes later and parked the rented buggy near the boarding house. He found Jessica and Lucy visiting as though everything was just fine. "Are you ready?" he asked Lucy. She nodded and then turned to Jessica. "Please come and visit me at the ranch. Mark can bring you." Mark slipped his hands under Lucy's shoulders and legs and easily lifted her from the bed. He carried her down the stairs and arranged her comfortably in the buggy. He unhitched the horse and minutes later, they were on their way. "I came to Valentine to find you so we can talk," Lucy said. Her voice was tight, and Mark knew she was in some pain. "I'm sorry," Mark said, not knowing what he was apologizing for. Everything seemed such a muddle. Where had he gone wrong? He was in the buggy with Lucy, but somehow he had left his heart with Jessica in the boarding house. "I know I'm going to disappoint you, but I have to be honest. I don't want to marry you, Mark. He must have gasped out loud, for she quickly proceeded to try and comfort him. I'm not the right kind of wife for you, she said. I'm a simple girl who wants a simple life. What do I know about throwing dinners for the kind of people you're friends with? She stopped speaking and took a deep breath. I know you loaned Pa money to replenish the cattle with the understanding that we would wed. Wait, Mark said. That's not why I came to your father's aid. I helped him because he's a good and hard-working man, and also because I was in a position to help. You saved our whole family and gave Pa his pride back. He's a good man. Mark couldn't understand the change in her. Why didn't you tell me before this? She shrugged. Because of the loan you gave Pa. What changed? Mark asked. Her cheeks reddened, and she lowered her gaze to her hands on her lap. George said if I didn't tell you, he would come and tell you himself. Who is George? Mark said, and then everything became clear. George is the man you have feelings for? She nodded and refused to meet his gaze. Compassion for the couple flooded him. So, you let me court you, knowing you had feelings for someone else? I'm sorry, she mumbled. I feel just terrible. I could hardly bring myself to visit with you when you came by. Mirth rose up his throat. He and Lucy were a pair of fools. Lucy turned away to look out at the passing landscape. Jessica, that nice girl who helped me, she's the kind of girl you ought to marry. I like her, Mark admitted. He more than liked her. He loved her. She talked about you a lot, Lucy said. He nodded, trying to suppress his smile. So, Jessica spoke a lot about him. He could not believe how things had worked out. It seemed too good to be true. He did not have to marry Lucy, and he was free to court Jessica, if she would have him. He couldn't wait to get back to Valentine Town the following day and put things right with her. I'm frightened of telling Pa, Lucy said. George is a shoemaker, and Pa had his sights set on me, Mark finished for her. All parents want their daughters to marry where they will not want for anything, and your father is no exception. He wants the best for you. Will you speak to him yourself? Tell him our courtship is over? Her voice shook slightly. He felt sorry for her, but Mr. Stapleton was a reasonable man and he would understand. Of course, I will. I'll even praise your George, so you had better tell me the kind of person he is, so I'll not be lying. That got a laugh from her, and she leaned back and seemed to unwind. Well, he's hard-working. Chapter 11. Jessica allowed Matthew Brown to assist her from her chair, and together they left the diner. She resisted the urge to cast one last glance at Mark brooding by the corner. Dusk was gathering, and soon, it would be completely dark. Anxiety gripped her. She hoped Mark would have a safe trip back to Ashland that evening. Jessica, Matthew said, outside the boarding house. I think you're a lovely lady, and I would be honored if you'd allow me to formally court you. She turned her attention to him. In the near darkness, his brown eyes shone with kindness. The girl who would someday be his wife would be lucky indeed. The trouble was, she couldn't imagine waking up to him every morning. She would wish he was Mark, and he would grow to hate her for it. Mark had spoiled all other men for her. Bitterness swirled in her mouth. He had come to Valentine Town every single day since he'd left with Lucy, each time brooding as he watched her being courted by Matthew Brown. Jessica suspected it was guilt that was gnawing at him for the way he had let her carry on, knowing he had no intention of marrying her. He wanted to apologize to assuage his guilt. As much as she wanted to teach him not to ever treat another woman like that, she was growing weary from seeing him every day. Instead of her feelings dissipating, they grew stronger each time she saw him, and it made her efforts with Matthew taxing. Jessica, does your silence mean yes? Matthew asked. I'm sorry, it doesn't, she said to him, and instantly regretted her words when she saw the hurt in his eyes. She was doing the same thing to Matthew that Mark had done to her. To her relief, Matthew shrugged and put on a half-hearted smile. A man can try. I know the mayor brought you over for Mark Thrush, but I was hoping you might give some of us a chance. I wish I could, she said, suddenly feeling tired of it all. Valentine's Day was a week away, and she had fervently hoped to have a special day with a special someone. Instead, she would be wallowing in her room as all the other girls enjoyed themselves with their men. She cast a look around her. Valentine Town was beautiful, but it was not the place for her. She had experienced nothing but disappointment and heartbreak since she'd arrived. At that moment, Jessica made a decision. She was going to start home the following day. There was nothing for her here anymore. She would go to one of her siblings and ask for a place to stay until her parents returned from their travels. She imagined the looks of sympathy from her siblings. They would never forget her silliness for going west to look for a husband. I wish you all the best, Matthew said, and then he took her hand and kissed the back of it. She watched him leave and then turned toward the stairs. Jessica? She paused and slowly turned around. She had not looked closely at Mark in the diner, but now she noticed his ravaged looks. He looked as terrible as she felt. Please give me a chance to explain myself, he said. Hurry up then, I have to pack for tomorrow. I'm leaving Valentine Town. His eyes grew darker. You're leaving? His voice was thick. Yes, there's nothing for me here, Jessica said. What about Matthew? Isn't he courting you? She looked away. I've had enough of courtship. Before she knew what was happening, Mark closed the gap between them and took her hands in his. The sudden shock of his touch overwhelmed her, and her legs grew weak. She tried to extricate her hands from his. She needed distance from him, otherwise, she would make a fool of herself and beg him to love her back. Listen to me, Jessica, Mark said. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and it's made me lose the woman I love. She snapped to attention. What happened to Lucy? I don't mean Lucy, he said. She sucked in a breath. What was going on? I need to start from the beginning. When the mayor told me about the four of you and how he had one bride in mind for me, I was upset. He hadn't even consulted me really. And I had long decided I would never marry a girl from the East. I stupidly thought that a girl who had not been born here would find life too difficult and leave. We all knew life was hard here, Mayor Clarence did not hide it from us. We were prepared, Jessica said. By the time you arrived, I had already decided to court Lucy Stapleton as she fitted into my idea of a frontier wife. Her parents were also eager for our union. Jessica had figured out all that, but hearing it from Mark's mouth made her chest contract with pain. There was only one problem, Mark said. She was not you. Her lower lip trembled as his words penetrated her heart. Hope soared in her. Was Mark saying what she thought he was? She couldn't bear to be wrong. You're beautiful and kind-hearted and would make a true frontier wife, Mark said, his voice shaking with emotion. What is a frontier wife? Jessica asked amidst tears. A lady who never gives up, who fights for what she loves. His voice trailed away with uncertainty. Am I getting ahead of myself? Am I correct in believing that you too have feelings for me? I love you, Jessica. She let out a cry and threw herself into his arms. I love you, too, she said, burying her face into his shirt. His arms went around her and he held her close. So, will you be my wife? Her sobs turned into happy laughter. Chapter 12. Mark and Jessica were married in the small church on the knoll by Preacher James on Valentine's Day morning. The town folk had gone all out and decorated the small church with branches and dried grasses. Jessica could not contain her joy as she stood at the back of the aisle of the church, flanked by Dorothea, Idella, and Pearl. I can't believe you're the first of all of us to get married, Dorothea said. Jessica shook her head. Everything happened so fast. We'll never accuse Mark of not being enthusiastic, Pearl said, and they all broke into grins. Idella fussed with Jessica's veil. You look so pretty. Mark is a lucky man. Thank you, Jessica said, stifling a sob. She distracted herself by smoothing down her heavily trimmed muslin dress. Just then, organ music sounded from inside the church. "Here," Dorothea said and handed Jessica a bunch of decorative grasses. The 3 bridesmaids entered the church. After a moment, Jessica inhaled deeply and then entered to large smiles from the guests. Her eyes bounced around the church and only stopped when she saw Mark. He looked so solemn and serious waiting for her at the front. When she neared him, he took a step forward and took her hand. She heard little of what Preacher James said as she kept her eyes on Mark, unable to quite believe that she would soon be his wife. Before she knew it, they had said their vows and Pastor James was wishing them a good, happy marriage full of God's blessings. Mark kept her hand in his as they left the church and entered the buggy for the ride back to the boarding house for their wedding breakfast. "Oh, look," Jessica said as Mark stopped the buggy in front of the boarding house. Mrs. Williams and Dorothy had done a fine job decorating the front of the diner with wreaths of branches. The 2 women must have been watching for them, as they both spilled out of the diner followed by the mayor, who had beat them there. "Congratulations," the mayor boomed. "I left the church early to make sure everything was ready. Not that I needed to, with these 2 ladies here." Dorothy and Mrs. Williams beamed and congratulations rang all around. "So, Mr. Thrush, what do you say to making Valentine Town your permanent home then?" Mark glanced down at Jessica. "That's a decision for Mrs. Thrush, I'm afraid." The mayor shifted his glance to Jessica. "Mrs. Thrush?" Jessica smiled. "I wouldn't live anywhere else." The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.